Welcome to the Savvy Shopkeeper Retail Podcast. I'm your host, Kathy Cruz. Just like you, I'm an independent retail business owner. I love the home decor and gift boutique I co-own with my sister, but I don't want it to consume me or my life. Join me each week as I share lessons learned, helpful tips, and valuable information for your retail business and life. Whether you're buying your products or making your products, whether you're a $25K business or a $2.5 million business, I'm on a mission to help indie retailers work less, profit more, and grow. Let's get started on today's episode. Welcome to episode 221 of the Savvy Shopkeeper Retail Podcast. Managing vendor relationships. Are they friends or colleagues? I'm your host, Kathy Cruz. So before I get started on today's episode, I just recently returned from the Evolve conference in Denver, and I have quite a few things that I'm processing and trying to condense, I guess, in my brain, because I really think what I want to do is record a podcast episode on some of my own takeaways from participating in an event like that, from speaking to a room, I think of over 100 store owners, and all of the communication, all of the conversations I had during that weekend with both Master Shopkeepers members and store owners that I've never met. It was insightful, both on the part of other store owners and learning from them. And if you're a new listener, welcome. Thank you for listening to the Savvy Shopkeeper Retail Podcast now. And insightful about me because I'm always learning about myself. So I'm hoping that I can quickly record a podcast episode and share that one next week. But if I met you at Evolve, thank you. If you're a Master Shopkeepers member that attended Evolve, thank you. I really enjoyed the weekend. And to Crystal Media, thank you for hosting an event that was able to get us all together in a room. It doesn't happen often enough for independent retailers, and I genuinely appreciate Crystal and her team and everything that was done. Okay, so my intention for this episode is to share some tips and suggestions for managing relationships with vendors. I want to clarify, when I say vendors, I'm not talking about sales reps that you work with when you're buying from manufacturers, for example. I'm referring to store owners who rent to or consign with vendors in their stores. Because I think sometimes the word vendor can be used interchangeably in retail, so I just want to be really clear from the beginning. This list covers a variety of topics when it comes to having vendors in your store, but first, I want to talk about some of the more challenging areas for store owners when it comes to these relationships. For vendors and consignment store owners, especially those starting out, they believe friendship comes first, that friendship has to be a priority in order for this to work. And I want to make a slight change to that. Relationships, yes, of course, they are incredibly important and should be nurtured and appreciated. But as business owners, it's important to prioritize boundaries and communication over friendship, especially when you're starting these relationships. So what do I mean when I say boundaries? I don't know, I guess you can say rules, possibly, if you want to describe them that way. And when it comes to vendor relationships, it could be something like items for your booth have to be dropped off and merchandised between X and Y hours, or texting the store owner between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. is not permitted, or something like booths must be cleared of garbage and dusted X times per month. Pretty simple, right? If you're a vendor store owner and the boundaries I'm sharing, the examples I'm sharing don't exactly jive, don't laugh at me. I never owned a vendor store. I'm just kind of making them up, especially with a lot of vendor store owners that I've worked with, both in Master Shopkeepers and one-on-one. What matters is that you, the store owner, gets to determine these boundaries for yourself and for your business. Setting boundaries is more than okay. I'm giving you permission to do this. It's your business, your rules. The vendors then get to decide if they want to comply. This is the moment store owners, especially new store owners who aren't familiar with or comfortable setting boundaries, they start to cringe or they start to think about people pleasing. That comes front and center. And if this is you, keep listening. This is one thing I hear so often when it comes to vendor store owners. I don't want to be the bad guy or gal. And when you think this, when you think, I don't want to be the bad guy or bad gal, the result is number one, you don't establish rules because that makes you uncomfortable. Number two, you certainly don't enforce anything because you're afraid to make the rules. And number three, you definitely don't want to have a conversation about it because oftentimes in your mind, that means confrontation. You just want to make everyone happy. This is the thing though, and I want you to pause if you're multitasking. When you don't set the boundaries, you don't enforce them, and you don't have conversations about them, I want to say this again. You focus on making everyone else happy, but you aren't making yourself happy. As a result, you feel taken advantage of. You feel like everyone is getting what they want except you, and you might even feel burned out. Many of us default to people pleasing and or wanting everyone to be our friend and everyone to be happy. And I get it. And again, I'll add that I didn't have vendors in my store when I co-owned a store with my sister, but I know what people pleasing syndrome looks like. On top of that, our brains naturally default to what's comfortable. And for some of you, comfortable sometimes means no conflict. However, comfortable doesn't always get us the results that we're looking for, especially in business. If setting boundaries doesn't come naturally to you, or maybe you didn't realize that a lack of boundaries is the problem because some of you are listening and going, oh, yeah, Kathy, that's what's happening here. Now you know. And what I'm hoping that you get as a result of this episode is that this conversation between me and you, because I always feel like I'm just talking to one of my friends, one of my biz friends, that this conversation will help you build the boundary setting muscle. Some entrepreneurs, they have to build the muscle that allows them to say, these are my rules. This is how I'm going to enforce them. This is how and when we're going to talk about it. This doesn't come naturally to a lot of us. And some of you are thinking, ew, Kathy, like, I don't want to do that. You use the word enforced. You use the word that we're going to talk. You use the expression, I should say, that we're going to talk about it. I promise you as a business owner, you're going to be so much happier when you do this, when you build this muscle, even if it is uncomfortable as you implement it. So let's get started. Here's a list of overall tips to help you effectively manage vendor relationships. Now, I focused on boundaries and rules and enforcing and some of the tough things that come from having those conversations. I focused on that at the beginning of this episode because, again, this tends to be the hardest for shop owners to implement, but they have a whole list of things that can help you manage vendor relationships. And for some of you who have vendor stores, a lot of these may not be new to you. But I know sometimes for me, listening to something, even if I've been in business for 10 years, it's a good reminder, a good refresher. So that's what I'm hoping for. So first is have clear booth rental agreements. You want to have clear and comprehensive agreements that outline the terms and conditions, again, like those boundaries that I mentioned, including rental fees, duration rules, and expectations. Expectations is a big one, right? Because as store owners, we want the experience in our store to be beautiful or curated or look a certain way. So we have to communicate that with the vendors in the stores. You also want to clearly communicate any rules regarding product display, pricing, and promotion within the booths. The next one is regular communication. You want to maintain open and transparent communication with vendors. You want to keep them informed about any changes in policies, events, or promotions. You want to establish a communication channel. So if you're wondering, well, like let's say, for example, if you have 40 vendors in your store, like how do I communicate with them? It could be in a variety of ways. I've seen people do it in many ways: a newsletter, email updates, regular meetings. You just want to make sure that you're sharing important information with the vendors and consistently. I've even seen people use a Facebook group for communication with their vendors. And it just really seems to be different for all store owners. What works for one store may not work for another. This episode is brought to you by my free resource, Tools of the Retail Trade Resource Guide, a 28-page downloadable resource filled with software, tools, and equipment recommendations just for brick and mortar retail store owners. Learn what I use and what other store owners are using. Visit savvyshopkeeper.com/resources. That's savvyshopkeeper.com/resources and sign up for my newsletter to get the guide. The next is establish accountability and consequences. I guess you could pair this with the first one about having clear booth rental agreements. In that agreement, you do want to explain how do you plan on holding them accountable? And then for sure, what are the consequences if they don't follow the rules, if they don't comply with your boundaries? That's really, really important because that's going to give you a bit of a leg to stand on when somebody says, well, I didn't know, or I wasn't aware, or why does so-and-so have that rule or why do I have that rule and so doesn't have that rule? Because again, being consistent with all of the vendors is also important. That'll eliminate quite a bit of drama. The next one is provide support and resources. Offer support to your vendors. You want them to be successful so that you're successful, right? Especially the new ones. You can provide guidance on merchandising, product display, and booth design. Make resources available, like information on customer demographics, market trends, marketing materials that vendors can then use to also help promote the store overall. Next is vendor meetings. Can you schedule regular vendor meetings to discuss any concerns, address feedback, and just maybe foster a sense of community? I don't think there's anything wrong with that. You want them to all establish relationships with each other. They don't all have to be best friends, but I think establishing that sense of community means that they're supporting each other and supporting you, and then you're doing the same for them. You can also use the meetings to plan collaborative events, promotions, or strategies to drive foot traffic to the retail store. Another thing that I love is ask them for ideas. You're only one person, right? But if you have multiple vendors, 20 brains and 20 creative ideas, way better than one is my thinking. The next one is feedback mechanism. What kind of system can you establish to provide them with feedback? And for you to collect feedback from them, I think that's important. Now, it doesn't mean that every bit of feedback that you get from them, you're going to implement. I think it's important to express that. They may not get everything that they want, but again, I think it's important to have that communication or an option or a way to communicate that to you. Maybe it's an annual survey. Very similar to the survey I do for Savvy Shopkeeper. It's important for me to listen to all of you and to hear what you're struggling with, what's helpful, what's effective, what are you looking for? Now, I don't implement everything, right? But I really try to prioritize the things that come up the most often. And then, of course, if you do an annual survey for your consignors or vendors, you want to make sure that you act on constructive feedback and you address any issues promptly, especially to maintain a positive vendor relationship or just a positive vendor vibe overall in the store. Next is promotional events. Can you organize promotional events that involve all of the vendors? Can you encourage vendors to participate in joint marketing efforts to attract more customers to the store? I have a friend who works with multiple vendors one time a year. And whenever she does that, she does an Instagram takeover. And then each vendor actually takes over the Instagram account. They talk about themselves. They post 3 times a day. It's really fun. You learn about all of the vendors in the store. And I think that's a great way to cross promote. Not only are they helping you with your social media, but you're also helping promote them and they're in turn promoting you. Next one is fair and transparent practices. Ensure fairness. I kind of touched on this already, but you want to ensure fairness and consistency across all vendors. You want to avoid any additional drama, especially if you have a big vendor store. Fairness and standard rules for everyone is, I think, really important. Next one is flexibility and adaptability. Be flexible in accommodating vendors' needs and requests. Of course, when reasonable. This can help build trust and loyalty. And then be open to adapting policies or making improvements based on feedback and changing market conditions. And I should have probably mentioned that one right after the feedback mechanism point. But you get my point here. Okay, I have a couple more. Conflict resolution. Can you develop a process for resolving conflicts or disputes, maybe between vendors or maybe between you and a vendor, and be prepared to mediate when necessary? This is where building that muscle of having conversations and what might feel like tough conversations for you is going to be really important. Oftentimes it builds up a lot in our brains. Like it builds up to the point where we have so much anxiety or concern about it that we just avoid it. But many times, if you just approach the conversation, now it won't always be effective, but I feel like 90% of the time, if you approach a vendor or anyone where you feel conflict has occurred, I think it's important to walk in level-headed, cool, collected. So it means if something makes you really upset, you may not want to have that conversation immediately. Let it sit for 24 hours. Create a plan to have the conversation. Come in with a calm demeanor and just be a normal human being about it, right? Like we don't have to yell at each other. We don't have to throw accusations or be rude. How is it that you can frame the conversation and start the conversation so that you get good results at the end? And of course, you want to address any issues promptly. Now, I'm telling you to wait 24 hours just to be calm and collected. I don't recommend waiting a couple weeks because who knows what will happen in between that point and those 2 weeks. So make sure that you're addressing these promptly. The next one is networking opportunities. What can you do to facilitate networking amongst vendors or amongst other businesses with the vendors? This could lead to collaborations and then other like mutually beneficial partnerships. You never know what's going to come of it. And then consider organizing maybe vendor mixers or events where vendors can connect and share ideas. Yes, your customers are really important, but I think sometimes it's really helpful to get, same concept with a traditional brick and mortar retail store with a team of 10, 20 employees. I see it all the time, holiday parties and all of that. I think that your vendors are important part of your team too. So what can you do to nurture the relationships amongst each other and with you, and also just have fun? You all work really hard. And I think it's important to enjoy the relationships in your business and facilitating those relationships with them. So it's time to wrap this up. By implementing some or all of these suggestions, I think you can create a positive and collaborative environment for both vendors and customers in your retail store. Will there be drama? Will there be problems? Yeah, probably. It's business, right? But can you minimize it by implementing some of these things? I think that's what's important here. By understanding that this is a business relationship that can certainly be friendly, you will empower yourself to establish rules, hold your vendors accountable, and take necessary action. And sometimes that means terminating an agreement, especially when rules aren't followed or criteria isn't met. And it's okay. Remember, vendors are small business owners too. Whether they view it this way or not is up to them. Meaning, some of the vendors you're going to bring in don't have the same standards as you, don't view their booth or their consignment relationship as a business. That might bother you. So setting those boundaries and the rules and the criteria will help you find the vendors that align with you. With that, and to answer the question at the beginning, I believe they are your colleagues, not your friends. Can you be friendly? Yes. Can you build relationships and friendships? Yes. I really appreciate that what 2 Master Shopkeepers members recently said on this topic. One mentioned the emotional maturity we gain and grow into as experienced store owners. And I can't agree more. Use this maturity that you've earned and gained as you've grown your own brick and mortar store to set the example for your vendors. And a second group member said, from my experience, some professional distance is good, but inevitably the people who are really good and respect your boundaries evolve into friends. And I thought that was a great way to say that. If you found this podcast episode helpful, please share it with a retail business friend, especially one with a vendor or a consignment store. Or leave me a rating and a review on Apple Podcast. I genuinely appreciate it. If you want to see the show notes to this episode or find links to anything I mentioned, visit my blog at savvyshopkeeper.com/episode 221. And as much as I have to say on the topic of vendor and consignment stores, of course, I have to keep this to 20 minutes. There's so much more I can say. If you are a Master Shopkeepers member, know that there is a vendors and consignment module all the way at the bottom of the lab, filled with resources and other lessons on the topic. So if you are dipping your toe in the water, maybe you're bringing in vendors or maybe you're considering consignment, that's a great module to visit and to review. Or if you're struggling in this area and want some information to help set boundaries, to have a written agreement. Maybe you want to grab the handbook sample that's in the lab to start to establish that, because you might be thinking, well, I have 20 vendors and I'm kind of struggling with them, but I don't have anything written down. I don't have any guidelines for them. So go ahead and visit those resources in the lab if you're a Master Shopkeepers member. And if you don't know what Master Shopkeepers is and you want to learn about it, you'll go to savvyshopkeeper.com/group membership. That's savvyshopkeeper.com/group membership. Until the next episode, be savvy and boss up.